Welcome back to the Shifting Schools podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Udick. And if you are a first-time listener to the podcast, welcome. And you're in for a treat as we're in our summer-long mini-series on the power of play. I want you to think about the last time you truly played like a child without worries. Can you remember it? How did it make you feel? Keep that feeling in mind as we dive into today's episode, which is all about the power and importance of play in our lives as well as our educational systems. We're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Paul Davarsi, the CEO and co-founder of Goldbug Interactive. Paul is not just a leader in digital design for education and social justice, but also an avid advocate for integrating play across all stages of life. Today, he shared his expert insight on how play isn't just for kids. It's a vital part of how we should all interact with our world. You'll want to listen closely as Paul busts common myths about play, discuss the cognitive and social benefits that play offers adults, and explores how varying our daily routines can enhance our sense of discovery and joy. It's a conversation that promises to change how you view your daily routine and the concept of play in learning environments. Paul is also the executive director of the Serious Play Conference and lectures at the University of Toronto. He has consulted with notable organizations such as Epic Games and UNESCO, and his work has been featured on platforms like NPR, CBC, and Edutopia. His experiences bring a rich perspective on how interactive media can foster educational and social growth. Now, before we jump in with our conversation with Dr. Paul, a quick word from today's show sponsor. Discover the power of acknowledgement with Libra. In a world where every staff member's dedication shapes the future, recognizing their efforts becomes our mission. Libra transforms your school into a place where achievements, big and small, are celebrated daily, creating a ripple effect of motivation and pride. Join the recognition revolution with Libra, where every achievement is a cause for celebration. For more information and a free demo, contact me at jeff@shiftingschools.com today. Now, let's dive in with Dr. Paul Davarsi and uncover the transformation of power of play. All right, welcome back to the podcast. Excited to be here with Paul talking more about the power of play. Paul, it's so great to have you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us today and talk about the power of play in education.
Yeah, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and especially since we're going to be discussing something that I feel so strongly about. So the pleasure is entirely mine.
Oh, thank you. Let's jump right in. We're trying to ask all of our interviewees for this mini series we're doing on the power of play. We're trying to ask them pretty much the same questions because everybody's coming from this from a little bit different angle, and it's such a cool kind of response. So the first question is, what is one myth about play that you seek to correct or to support people in understanding with the work you do through the Goldbug Interactive?
Yeah, so that's an easy one, I think. And I'm glad I'm one of the first people.
Yeah, you're one of the first.
Yeah, that's great because then I get to answer this first because I'm sure a lot of my colleagues would go the same way. And that is that play is just for kids, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the low-hanging fruit is that increasingly I think there's an acceptance that play should be part of our lives throughout. It's a healthy undertaking. It's a healthy disposition towards life. And I feel that sometimes as we become adults, our sense of play in any number of ways becomes more constrained. And I think we have a lot to learn from children about what play is and the place that play has in our life.
Oh, I love that. The research about play is very conclusive, like you said, not only for kids, but for us throughout our entire life. And it has huge benefits for us across our entire life spectrum. What would you like to see more awareness around when it comes to making play more accessible for everyone?
I think that part of it is how we think about play. Right?
Mm,
Because all of these terms are very difficult to define. We could spend the whole podcast talking about how you define play and what
sure.
falls within the parameters of play. And it's the same for games. It's one of the trickiest things to define. And there's no conclusive definition of game. And definitions to some degree are important because when we think about adults playing, it's not necessarily that you're in a sandbox with a plastic bucket and shovel, right?
Right.
It's also having a playful attitude, having a sense of humor with life, being able, because there's a certain freedom implied
Mm,
by play that I think is part of the definition of play. There's a voluntary way of being in the world. And I think that once we start conceiving of play through a certain lens, we start seeing opportunities to improve our life through that, right? Breaking our routines is a form of play. One of my favorite examples is many of us, we're increasingly working at home, but if we
yeah,
have to go to work in the morning,
that's right.
chances are we're taking pretty much the same route every day or a very similar route, or we're taking the same bus or the same bus and train or whatever the case may be. And I think what happens is that routine becomes numbing after a while.
Mm,
You don't even remember it anymore because you're on automatic pilot.
yeah.
And you stop noticing things around you. You stop seeing because you're on the way to work. If I were to fly you to Venice, Italy tomorrow, you would be awake. You would be noticing everything, seeing everything, taking it all in because you're in travel mode. There's this kind of really interesting artist named Guy Debord from the 50s, 40s. He was a Dadaist. And so he has this whole thing called a derive. And what
Mm,
that is a way to interact with your cities and your spaces that is playful, a playful engagement. So what he would do before going to work every morning is he created a deck of cards that had all kinds of routes and alternatives to get to work, not necessarily always the most efficient.
yeah.
And he would draw a random card in the morning, and then he would alternate his path to work.
Mm,
And I think that's an amazing example of how we can inject play in our lives even beyond childhood. And it's not just, it's ultimately healthy. It's ultimately
mm,
cognitively beneficial. But what we run into with play, especially with adults, is efficiency, because there's nothing wrong with being efficient. But I think the
right.
Industrial Revolution has instilled in us almost a mechanical kind of efficiency that goes beyond human levels of efficiency. Everything, the way that schools are structured, the way that
Sure.
workplaces are structured, it's all about optimization and efficiency. And that's always at the expense of play. And I
Mm,
think that
I
what
love
makes us
that.
uncomfortable about play is that we are geared from childhood, from the day that we start kindergarten, towards being efficient. So I think the
Mm,
challenge now is, how do we we don't want to be inefficient, right? We never want
right.
to be inefficient, but
Right.
how do we create new boundaries of efficiency in order to allow play into our lives?
I love that. And it's so interesting that you say that because as I'm listening to you, I'm reflecting on with all of these new AI tools coming out, almost all of the messaging around it is how to be more efficient, how to be more efficient. This is going to make you do your job better and faster and be more efficient. And it's interesting. You're right. We're in this mindset. Librarians, meet MacEnvision, the future of library management. With a student-centered design, MacEnvision's intuitive interface and seamless navigation ensures that your students find the information they need quickly and effortlessly. Discover how MacEnvision can transform your school at macen.com/MacEnvision. With this transition we're having also for more and more of us working from home,
Mhm.
how much more important is it for play that we don't even get to take a different route to work? Like we get up, you shower, you have your routine, whatever it is, you go to your office, you're done in your office and you go back upstairs or you leave your office to your living room. And there's maybe even less opportunity in the day for physical movement and even getting out of your space that maybe we even had just a few years ago before these work at home movements. Are you seeing some of this? Is there any research on just how we can build this back in or what this is doing to us in a playful manner?
My research is entirely anecdotal and
Okay.
centered on my own life.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, that's great. I think that's where we're at right now with
experience.
research. We're all
So,
trying to figure it out.
yeah, and I think here's what I find. I try to make time every day to go for walks, for runs, to go. But what's interesting is when I had a more 9 to 5 schedule, I felt that I was railroaded into times and schedules in a
Mm,
much more all encompassing way. Whereas now I have meetings that I have to, but I have more flexibility in how I manage my
sure.
day. And it's different for everybody, right? You may
Right.
have it really depends on what the demands are on you and where you have to be and how you're accountable. But I think ultimately it may end up being a healthier thing. I think it really depends. I don't think there's a single answer, but I think if we manage our time well enough, that we have the freedom to live our days a little differently every day, to not necessarily fall into stifling routines. My walk might be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or it might be at 8 o'clock in the morning on another day, depending on how my day plays out.
Right.
And that difference is very different. The birds are
Yeah.
chirping more at 8, the sun is higher at 1, and all those
Mm,
things stimulate us a little bit differently. And I think that does give us at least an opportunity to have more freedom that I equate with play
sure.
and not fall into these kind of mechanical routines.
Is there any research that you've seen that shows that, and I think there's some that have come out of Europe around the more free time you have like this, you are actually more efficient at work. I know that a lot of times from an American centric approach, we look at almost the entire, especially Western Europe, takes the month of August off and they do very little work in the month of August. And it's just part of their culture, but they also work less hours. But the research shows that they're actually more efficient because they have more flexibility. Like even when I'm traveling to Europe, it's nothing to have a 2 hour lunch. Like people take a 2 hour lunch all the time. They go for walks and they go out to have a nice relaxing lunch, not especially in education, something you're trying to scarf down in 30 minutes. Is there any research around that though, around this idea of play and efficiency? If there is more play in your life, there is an actual increase in efficiency?
Well, again, anecdotal.
Yeah.
But so many successful people say that part of their formula for success is that they take time to turn off work, to go to bed early, to not work 18-hour days. A
Yeah.
lot of people get up early, get some things they love to do done early, and then start in the workday. I think I don't know the why so much,
Sure.
but my sense, if I had to guess, and there's
Yeah.
absolutely no evidence to back what I'm saying, or that I know of anyway,
Yeah.
is that I think because our mental health is supported by that, right? Like having those breaks, having a change in scenery, doing the things that you love, that when you're digging into the work, I think you're more focused, you get more done with the time that you have. I also feel that sometimes you're so regulated in a work environment that there's a lot of things that you do that aren't really efficient. They're efficient in terms of how they're using your time, but they're
Yeah.
not necessarily efficient in how they're getting the most out of you, or how
Mm,
I think that even though it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, giving yourself more space, more time off, more, or at least a change. They say that a change of work is like a rest,
yeah.
right? To do something different, I think is more stimulating and maybe helps you focus more and really dig into what you have to do when you have to do it. Whereas you may just be drifting a little more when you're tired and
Yeah.
resentful and wanting to be somewhere else, or that type of thing.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Talk a little bit about your work over at Goldbug Interactive, and we'll make sure we link to it in the show notes. What are you doing over here, and what is the premise?
Yeah. So what we are is a studio, and we make games and media for clients. So we don't
Mm,
actually put our own product to the market. We work with humanitarian agencies and museums and libraries and universities. And they come to us and they say, hey, we want to make a game to help Afghanistan grow more trees. And then
mm,
we take that information, we talk to subject matter experts, and then we build them a game to do that. We do a lot
wow.
of digital games. We've done some really cool board games as well. And the work always changes because the clients always change. So we
Right.
Yeah. And that's generally what we do. And pretty much most of it tends to be pro-social. We feel like at least we're trying to do some good in the world. And it's all absolutely underpinned by learning. Every type of game that we create has a learning element, or is trying to mobilize awareness or knowledge about something. So that's the gist of it.
Wow, that's very cool. For anyone who's interested in possibly pursuing a career like yours, what are other skills do you think are essential to develop as aspiring founders or CEOs in today's age, today's markets?
That's a really hard question for me because it wasn't, I'm somebody who I've always followed the things I love to do, right?
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of people tell you, right? That's the classic kind of commencement speech.
Yeah.
Do what you love, right?
Yeah.
$200,000 to do an engineering degree that they hate, right? But
Right.
do what you love.
Right.
But I do think that when you do what you love, my mother is awesome. My mother said, I don't care if you're shoveling manure for a living, just be the best possible manure shoveler that you can.
I love that.
And I should have gone into politics because they're very good at shoveling manure, right? but so I tended to, and weirdly, when I pursued my backgrounds in literature, I taught English for a while, and that's what I love to do. And I never really thought about moving into a games career. And over time, I started becoming interested in games through my teaching, started experimenting with games, designing games, and then circulating in that world. So when I think about it, when I'm telling a young person, how do you want to break into this or how do you want to connect? I think the number one advice I would give is to network in that community. And to me, conferences are a really great way to do that because it's one, you can really absorb a lot of knowledge in a very efficient way, that word again, in a conference. But you also can meet people who are at various points in their careers that have advice to give you and that could become helpful to you as you're pursuing your career. For partnerships, they might employ you, they might be people you want to hire. So I think that would be really key. So a combination of doing what you love, if this world of games or some aspect of play is what you love, learn as much as you can, get your hands dirty with it, create, make, connect with people. And if you keep pushing, eventually you start seeing opportunities come out.
I love that. Mackin Educational Resources has once again partnered with us for our summer mini-series. Thank you to Mackin for continuing to be a partner of the Shifting Schools community. Their new product, Mackin Vision, is the future of library management. Created with your students' need at the forefront, Mackin Vision offers a user-friendly interface that simplifies navigation, making it easy for students to find what they need. This state-of-the-art system includes features like intuitive browsing, secure multi-level access, multimedia searching, and whole school rostering. Additionally, it has a teacher library portal, aggregated dashboard, live analytics, and centralized reporting. Mackin Vision is designed to streamline your school's library operations. Learn more about how Mackin Vision can benefit your school at mackin.com/MackinVision. Schedule your free demonstration and experience the future today. What is one piece of advice you have for listeners, knowing that the majority of our listeners are educators, they're going to be school coaches, school administrators? What's one piece of advice you have for those listening who are looking to better maybe embed this idea of play into their own daily lives or even into our classrooms? Like you said, I think one of the things we're trying to help and support with is I don't think you will find an educator that won't say play is important, but trying to bring that into a classroom environment that is so highly structured to be efficient. What do you have any advice? What are some things we can do as both as adults and then also as leaders of young children?
First of all, it's a really tough battle because of what you were suggesting in that education is our education system is the child of the Industrial Revolution. There are few existing organizations or institutions that more faithfully follow the industrial template than education. And we talk systems really guide how we think and how we behave. And we talk the man, the system. And but there's a truth to that you can have the most a teacher who really wants to make a difference and really do something different. But it's very hard when you're still working with those schedules, you're working with all of these mandates, everything in the system has this massive momentum that takes you in a certain direction. Even basic things like kids are grouped according to their same age group.
Right.
That to
Not
us,
according to interest.
what's that?
Not by interest, right?
Not by
By actual
interest,
age. Yeah.
or even like what we've taken it to be so normal
Yeah.
that it's almost abnormal when kids start hanging out with, oh, he's too old for you, or what are you doing hanging out with 7-year-olds, like that kind of thing. But everything in our evolutionary history says that is a symptom of social health. When you have multi-generational interactions, everybody is seamlessly learning all the time because you're mentoring while being mentored. Every age group contributes a unique feature to the social group. But
Right.
what we do is by isolating those age groups, they become aberrations within that age group because they're not being tempered by all the other age groups for that complete package that evolution made us to work within. So
Yeah.
all of this to say that these structures that we take absolutely for granted are always eroding at the attempts that teachers have to implement stuff. But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean give up and
Right.
call it a day. I'm just saying I'm recognizing how
Yeah.
hard it is and the why it's so hard.
Yeah.
My most successful experiments as a teacher were when not just using games, and this is a big ask, but I'm putting it out there. It's the blue sky scenario. It's not just using games, but it's when I turned the entire class into a game. Because what that did was it hacked the system. All of a sudden, and it was something that I did under very special circumstances where there wasn't a lot of supervision. I got away with murder to do it. But what I saw without a doubt is it changes everything. It changes the dynamics of the students. It changes who you engage. Like the kid at the back of the class who's dying a slow death because he's miserable, all of a sudden becomes your liveliest participant, right? And what I also discovered is that productivity went up. So it wasn't even by creating a more playful, more dynamic environment that really challenged a lot of the conventions of industrial education. Everybody woke up. And it was a very different experience. But in a practical sense, that's not practical. That's saying this is what you should be aiming for. One, to just see and research how teachers have been using particularly game-based learning. If you start going down, because teachers learn best through practical models, right? Because there's a lot of talk in education, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that talk doesn't translate into action or change. So what does translate into action or change is somebody who's proven that you can do something. Like I did it. I brought this video game in my classroom and look at what happened to my students. And there are tons of examples of that stuff in every subject. So if you look up physical education and game-based learning, science and game-based learning, English and game-based learning, you will find tons of examples, technical and non-technological, that'll give you guidance to do that. One of my favorite teaching books ever, and it's called What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy by an author named James Paul G. And what's really powerful about that book is even if you completely hate video games or you don't play video games, like that's not part of your repertoire, you feel like you're fighting against video games because they are eroding at school, it's probably one of the best teaching books written. And video games are almost like a springboard to really think about best practices as a teacher. And a lot of what he talks about is a sensible way to include more playful practices and more meaningful ways to approach our practice as educators.
I love that. It's so interesting that you say that because I was just reading a study where we're talking about some of the work I do, especially in education, is around generational leadership and this idea of even at the school level, talking about how we as educators work together across different generations. And in some of that research, we're starting to look at what are we looking at the kids in our school, and especially those under the age of 12, which is considered Gen Alpha. And some of the research, and I forget who it came from. I think Vanderbilt came out with the first kind of research on, and what they're finding is this generation responds very well to a game-based learning approach. And I think part of it, I think there's a couple things you just hit on that just, I'm sitting here in my own head going through it of they will be now the fifth generation that's removed from the Industrial Revolution. So they don't know what the Industrial Revolution is. This whole thing's kind of unraveled on them. We have that happening at the same time that they're growing up in a post-pandemic world where there are less of their parents, less of us are going to work 9 to 5 versus my generation. Both my parents every day, 9 to 5 went to jobs. You have this generation that's growing up a little bit differently. And at the same time, the average child in America is touching a connected device, usually a phone or an iPad, for the first time around 18 months. And so by the time we get them into school at ages 6, 7, 8, they've probably been interacting with games in way more than any of us ever did by the time we got to school, right? Especially video games or technology-based games. And it's nobody's fault. It's just where we are in our own evolution as a society. And how do we tap into that? And I think what you're talking about is exactly that, that this idea of embracing this game-based culture that our kids are used to and that we live in is a playful way to bring learning front and center inside our schools and our classrooms and for ourselves.
And what's so important about what you said, what's totally lost on so many of us is that you use the word interactivity. That's the key. Yeah. Game is just a word to mask the concept of interactivity. Forget game, throw game out the window. If game scares you and you're not a game person, forget that. Just focus on interactivity because as you said it, kids have been interactive since they were born. But what's crazy about that is that for hundreds of years now, education has been put them in a room, stand there, force feed them things, and have a monodirectional transmission of information, right?
Right.
And that goes against the way that human beings have learned for tens and hundreds of thousands of years. Because how do we learn when before all that happened? Interactivity. We're out in the world. We're picking things and grabbing things and running and learning and talking and getting sticks. And then, I can make an arrow. And whoa, if I hit an arrow, that's how we learn. We learn through interactivity. And what these young people are just figuring out with a whole technological shell around them is that that's actually a better way to learn than what we've been doing all this time. So we're actually recuperating the best way to learn when we include interactivity, right? So when we're looking at things like experiential learning, project-based learning that's student-centered, all of that is recuperating the interactivity that we've lost. But it's still hard because of the system that, I described earlier. And I think that one of the tricks is whenever you're creating participation and interactivity in your class, that's really the spirit of game-based learning. That's the most important part. Games are just a structured or designed way to bring those concepts back into education.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I think this is such a great way to kick off our Power of Play mini series. Paul, thank you so much. So many things to be thinking about here, especially this time of year. This is coming out around the middle of June. Schools are just ending. You bring such great energy for teachers to just start thinking about next year and how do we up our level just a little bit more? We do the best we can, and just how do we continue to get better and think around and evolve around some of these ideas that are coming at us. If there are educators that want to reach out to you or administrators who are listening to this and being like, oh my gosh, I'd love to get Paul to come talk to our educators, what are some great ways for people to reach out to you?
You can just email me.
Okay.
If you want to put it on it's pauldarvasi@gmail.com. Just email me and I'm always happy to talk shop. That's for sure. I live for this stuff. It's my passion. And anytime a teacher is interested in changing their practice, I am there.
I love it.
Happily.
We'll also make sure that there are links to the Goldbug International, your LinkedIn account as well, for those that want to connect with you that way, and make sure all of that is in the show notes. People can just click on the show notes of this episode and find all of that contact information. Paul, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. It was such a pleasure. The time went far too quickly, and thank you for letting me talk about the things that I love and I feel are important.